to the JTM Community Podcast. I'm your host, Jason Melvin. If you are watching this, you already know who our guest today is, as he has been on the podcast multiple times before. Before we get into all of that, of course, if you want to touch base with me for advancement advising, you can do so at tm.community. If what you want is podcast specific stuff, just add /podcast to that. It'll take you exactly where you want to be. The easiest thing that you can do to be part of the community is join our socials, top right hand side of the website. Facebook is where a new poll is posted. It used to be every Monday. It is now every Friday. So you all decide the topics that we discuss. If there's ever a tie, then we talk about whatever the tie is. If it's a three-way tie, then talk about all three topics in the same amount of time. Today's format is going to be a bit of a combo. So we're likely to see a jump from Mason, who you are seeing now, and the other guest, who I'm not going to say until I put the whole video together. So we're going to go over essentially a fast mini-series of 7 or 8 different topics, ranging from more serious things to a little more lighthearted type of thing. So before we dive in, Mace, do you want to just introduce yourself just a little bit before we get going, in case this is someone's first episode?
Sure. My name is Mason. 40 years old. Have a wife, 2 kids. Kids are getting a little bit older. Been married for 19 years and currently active duty Air Force. Although everything that I say here is going to be my own opinion and have nothing to do with the government's opinion. So don't hold them accountable for my words, please.
All right, so we are going to talk about 4 different topics, which is the first one is the saying, blood is thicker than water. And then the second will be the idea of hobbies and how that helps to maintain and improve. The third will be the saying, many hands make light work. And then the fourth is new adventers and utilizing hindsight. So that one was a tie. So we'll essentially do about 7.5 minutes per there. So
I like them. Good topics today, Jason.
Thanks. If you are watching this, then you're going to see a timer pop up for 15 minutes. That helps us try to stick on task a little bit. What we found out early on in the podcast is if there's not something helping us stay focused time-wise, we tend to go off on giant tangents and go way too long. So without further ado, let's kick off to topic number 1, which is the idea, or the phrase, actually, blood is thicker than water. When you hear that, what do you think?
Yeah, so initially for me, like that's saying that, like, no matter what, we're family. Like, yeah, I'm going to do stuff for you versus others, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I don't know how much I necessarily believe that anymore. So sure. I guarantee there are some families that is the case where they do. They still really believe in that, and they will do everything for their family members. I don't know if that's necessarily been my experience or like from what I've seen people doing, that they necessarily really believe that anymore. So I think that's an older saying, and I think it's important. I do really think that family should be like your number one. Like, you do anything for your kids kind of business, you know, but I don't know if that's necessarily as true as it used to be.
Yeah, I could understand that. So I was excited for this particular topic because I know it's going to catch most people off guard, because the saying is, so what our culture makes it mean is actually the opposite of what it actually means. So we've essentially perverted it in cut out all the context. So I'm going to read the context just briefly, because it's actually pretty fascinating. So the actual phrase,
I've not ever looked this up either. So that's
most people haven't.
Yeah, sure.
So I did a couple of years ago because somebody told me, and I was like, "What are you talking about?" Because this shit we've heard since we were kids, you know.
Yep, absolutely.
So the saying is actually, the blood of the covenant is thicker than the water of the womb. which the saying means that the chosen bonds are more significant than bonds with family or the water of the womb. So it's directly saying the people you chose to be part of your life and that you choose to bond with are stronger than the bonds that just are inherent from family ties.
Okay, well, I totally retract my statement because that is exactly in line with my way of thinking. Because
Yep.
yes, that like I do believe like the bonds that we choose and the people that choose to invest and we invest in their lives back and forth, those are going to be the relationships that matter to us and like where we put in the effort and what we'll do for people. Not necessarily, hey, just because you're my brother, sister, whoever. You're owed something at that point.
Yep. So I'm gonna spin this also in a professional sense, right? Most of not all of the time, but most of the time that's brought up when I'm working with individuals, couples, families, right? And that phrase is said that blood is thicker than water. They're referencing what we typically would think it to be, right?
Sure.
That essentially your bond of blood is thicker than that of like created relationships. And almost always that phrase is said, it's as an effort to enable poor behavior, right? It's an effort to say like you have to stick with me even though I've done these things because this bond is stronger than anything else. Or
Okay.
even though your mom or your dad did this thing, or even though your siblings did this thing to hurt or harm you in some way, like you still have to have their back. You still have to show up. You still have to be willing to understand and like engage with them. When you hear me
Yeah.
say
I mean,
that, does that seem accurate for you from like what your experiences have been, whether
yeah,
personal or professional?
yeah. I haven't personally had anybody like try to say like I have to
Mm-hmm.
hold on to certain types of bonds or anything like that. But yeah, the expectation of like there is some sort of obligation there it's strange to me. I don't particularly do it, and I think that it's a little bit um fantastical, like
Mm-hmm.
fantasy land
Okay.
it's like a fantasy to say that somebody has to be obligated just because they're family, right? So
Mm-hmm.
a really good example that actually happened fairly recently, but I just had a conversation with my spouse about this. So one of her older sisters, so I mean I want to say different mom, but older sister and so half sister, but they're separated by maybe 20-ish years of age. The
The
older
older
sister never
sister and
really.
your wife are separated by
Correct,
20
yeah.
years? Okay.
Yeah. And so there was a that individual had like struggled with drug and alcohol problems pretty much my wife's entire life. So there was never really a relationship there. The older sister was in and out of rehab,
Mm-hmm.
and anytime that she was in the picture, it was nothing but like drama or problems, right? Like things that her dad was trying to figure out. So fast forward to like more recently, that older sister had passed away, and when asked if my wife was going to go to the funeral, she chose not to, right? And like, I'm sorry, she went, but it wasn't because she was going for the sister that had passed. It was going to support her dad. And there was family members that had issues with that. And I was like, I mean, I would be doing the same thing, right? Like if I chose to go with her, I had no relationship with that person, but I would be going to support um like her. So I don't
Mm-hmm.
see where that's necessarily wrong. I think
Mm-hmm.
so when I say like people have a fantasy about like what relationships actually mean, they think that relationships just because well, like it's a circle of a sphere of influence around us, that
Mm-hmm.
you're owed something, and it's that I don't think that's the way relationships work. Like relationships work off of people, you putting in effort and those same people wanting to put effort back into your life. So if you think that you're expected or you're owed somebody's loyalty or like time and effort and them investing into you just because, I would question people on like like why that is, right? Like, because nobody wants to feel taken advantage of. Nobody wants to invest time and energy into something that goes nowhere. So I've often looked at it as there's like really two types of people, like givers and takers, and people pour into or give to others quite frequently, but it gets very tiring if on the other end of that relationship, it's just a taking relationship where they're not giving anything back. So yeah, I mean, I really, now that I understand that saying is flipped, I truly do believe that those blood is thicker than water then.
Yeah. I'm going to take what you're saying because it made me think of a banking metaphor, which is relevant to that whole thing, right? The idea of a community you can bank on is when you're talking about what a relationship is, it made me instantly think of having a joint bank account where the goal is to create a savings. So you have that the idea is that there's an understanding that everyone's going to be making deposits and then on the occasion making withdrawals. But when the withdrawals outweigh the deposits and there's an overdraft, damage is done. Right? So
not even that. I would I like that analogy, but look at it as one person starts putting more deposits in than withdrawals, and the other person's withdrawing more than depositing. It creates a tension in the relationship unless that's a known quantity going in that's going to be happening. And all it does is ultimately people, like the two people would end up butting heads and being angry with each other because it starts to feel out of balance.
Which is okay temporarily, because there's this ebb and flow of life where certain things will happen and kids will be in the mix or new jobs or a new location, right? So the investment will fluctuate over time, and the imbalance ideally will go from partner to partner, person to person, right, as things fluctuate. But the overall trajectory is the two are largely investing to build that savings. So very rarely are the deposits equal all the time, right? And that's fine as long as it's for a duration, and then that essentially kind of like balances itself out, right? So with that being the mindset, with the true understanding that blood is thicker than water, implying that relationships by choice, the bonds by choice are stronger than bonds of obligation, right? What can we do to kind of foster that or strengthen that in our own lives? For example, can I use your family as an example? And I know you have no idea where I'm going with this.
Yeah, throw it out there.
I would use myself, but I can't. So your wife essentially is a bond of choice, right?
Yes.
But your kids are a bond of obligation.
Yeah.
So within the same family unit, you have different types of those kinds of bonds. So what does that look like that's different? Does that feel different when we're being like so logical and thinking about that? I also know you love your wife and your kids, so
yeah. So I want to flip it around and go from my kid's perspective, perspective of my kid's perspective, if that makes sense, right? So, I mean, I've heard from both of them multiple times as they chose to, be wasteful or do whatever. Like, well, you chose to have us, right? Like, you chose to. So, like, you're kind of. I'm like, I owe them for bringing them to life, right? So, the interesting thing is, and I understand
that.
Yeah, I know. And so this is like a young person's perspective, and I know they don't have the wisdom to, in the hindsight, to look backwards and go yet and understand like where their place is, but they feel like they are. It's almost an entitlement. We're very careful to not foster that and not let them just feel entitled. But realistically, life in today's age, I think for a lot of people is fairly comfortable. Like even though grocery prices are going up and all these things, people aren't starving, right? Like in our parents' time, like life, I think, was generally harder. Like just, I mean, there's going to be people that deal with hardships nowadays, of course, and poverty and things, but I think for a lot of times it was more difficult then. So fast forwarding, kids feel like they're owed something. So then what happens, what I've experienced personally is feeling like, well, I'm being taken advantage of, right? Like you're just taking from me constantly and not understanding what the cost is. So then there's no appreciation. There's no like gratitude for like the lifestyle that they have. They don't really understand what I do for work. Therefore, they don't understand the effort that I go through to actually put the food on the table. So, you know, when the grocery bills are $300 and then that food gets thrown out or wasted, oh man, like I don't like that, right? I think that's probably a dad thing. Don't touch my thermostat, turn off all the lights. Those are pretty universal dad traits of like walking around not being wasteful. But when other people don't do that and follow suit, it can be very aggravating. So that's when it starts for me. There's a mutual respect with the spouse, to bring it back to your question, where the spouse, so my spouse, even though she doesn't do everything like how I would particularly do it, like we are a very good partnership, and where I do things she doesn't do and vice versa. So there's that mutual respect back and forth as we've grown up together. But when you're talking about a child, there's nothing that they can really do typically to give back. So that creates that imbalance already that we've been discussing for me personally, where it just feels bad, right? So but the biggest thing like so far is just that like always asking from a child is just, hey man, just take care of your own space. Like don't create an extra mess. Don't create more problems.
Yeah, your withdrawals don't have to be so big.
Yeah, then there is no withdrawal, right? Like I don't even care if you make your own food and waste a bunch of ingredients necessarily, but then don't leave the kitchen a mess, right? Like put it back how you found it, kind of thing. And I think that's just for me personally. But if that didn't exist, then there wouldn't be that level of frustration. So our kids are definitely, like I said, a little bit older, 18 and 15, and they're getting there. They're getting there to be better roommates, as I used to put it. But it's still a struggle for them, and I don't think they'll really understand that piece of it until they go out and are living on their own, buying their own groceries, and then they'll appreciate the things that they had previously a little bit more.
That makes sense. So it's kind of the mindset of we go through certain stages of life, and as we're learning that, we can think we understand the lens of the other, but the reality is that the only way they'll learn that lesson, for the most part, is to be on the other side of the coin. For them to be the one that is essentially feeling like others are, making those withdrawals.
Correct.
Whether it's a literal, like paying a bill, right, or having a shitty roommate someplace.
Yeah, go buy your own groceries and then have somebody else eat it all and see how that makes you feel.
Yeah. Yeah. You're going to be one of those parents that once one of the kids leaves, you're going to go over to visit and do the things that they would typically do. Yeah.
I have a couple reels saved just so I can make sure to do all the things.
Nice. Anyway, thank you, Mace, for chatting with me this morning. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Of course, if you want to touch base with me for advancement advising, you can do so at j-tm j-tm.community. If you want podcast specific stuff, just add /podcast to that. You can check out tons and tons of different episodes. I think this particular series will kick off I'll start with episode 131. So there's tons of guests, tons of different views and opinions over a variety of topics. Mason's probably been on, I don't even know how many times at this point. So if you like what Mason had to say or interested in his mindset, by all means, go back through, and every episode will list the guest just from the title on the website. So it'll be the number of the episode, it'll be the topic of the episode, and who that particular guest was. So super easy for folks to find. Again, Mace, I appreciate you for spending some time with me this morning and going over these few topics.
Absolutely. Have a great one, Jason.
I appreciate it. Thanks for everyone for tuning in and being part of a community where you belong.